Hey guys! So today we are going to be talking about the Age of Discovery and overseas exploration. So let's get into it. Um, so, so we really have to start with what these guys were looking for. And honestly, I think this picture gives us a really good image of it, as well as what may be the most important historical song ever written. So let's play that.
Sail the open sea, for glory, God, and gold, and the Virginia Company.
So obviously, our three main topics here are glory, God, and gold. So what do we mean by glory, God, and gold, right? First is glory. So these new monarchs of the Renaissance are looking to expand their territory and their income. We are seeing the rise of these early nation states, and they are competing with each other, especially with Italy. The impact of the Renaissance and the spirit of the Renaissance and humanism is making people like want to go out there more. We get more accurate maps and technology, and all of this allows people to want to go out and seek for the glory both of their nation and of themselves. Next is God. So the Crusades had created interest in spreading Christianity. The Jesuits are reacting to the Reformation and really want to spread Catholicism. And when they realize that there are people out there who have never heard about Jesus before, they really want to get out there and convert the pagans to Catholicism. And again, the big thing here is Catholicism. Most of these people want to spread Catholicism, not Protestantism. And then finally is gold. There is a need for new resources and trade routes. The prices of Asian goods have been inflated. People want to invest in new capital. And so all of these things are going to come together to really make a new desire to get out there and start looking for new opportunities. Now, the other big thing that they want to do is they want to get to India, and we'll see why that is in a second. But India has one thing that they really, really want, and that one thing is spices. It seems kind of strange to us today where we can go to the grocery store and buy any spice that we want off the shelf. But in this time period when that was not possible and spices were incredibly expensive, they were looking for any way that they could in order to make sure that they could find the things that they needed. So, in order to get to India, right, if you look at these routes, the route that they choose is the route around the Cape and the Horn of Africa, at least initially. So the question is, why are they going the long way? Well, there are a couple reasons for that. One is who controls the land routes. It's far too dangerous. There are a lot of complications and challenges to crossing the Silk Roads, and they just decide it's too dangerous. It's already being controlled. So why not go through the Mediterranean? Well, it's also being controlled. There is the gold salt route in Africa that's already being controlled. The Mughals and the Ottomans control the Mediterranean. And so basically, what these Europeans need to do is find a way to cut out the middleman. The Mongols, the Ottomans, the Mughals, the Africans, they have to trade through them. And they want to find a way that they can make their own trade routes. So they really have two options when it comes to finding their own route. One is to sail around the coast of Africa and make it that way. But one guy, Christopher Columbus, decides, you know what? What would happen if we sailed west to get to east? And so he believes he can sail through that part of the world, which has never been sailed by Europeans before, in order to get to the Indies. So this is what leads for men like Christopher Columbus to really get out there and start exploring. Now, I think it's important to understand because we're used to a map that looks like this, but you need to understand what these guys are working with, right? So this is a map from 1492, which is the same year that Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? So I want you to take a good look at this map here and see what we've got. So over here, we've got Africa, very weirdly shaped. We've got Indonesia and the Indies in the wrong place. We've got India and Asia, Arabia, which is the Middle East, and of course, Europe. And if you look, right, the way this globe works, there is India again. So the rest of this is over here. So there's a pretty big missing chunk that we know today exists, which is, of course, the Americas. Because again, you have to remember they did not know that this existed. So for them, for all they knew, it was just open ocean, right? So, as we are discovering these new territories, it becomes more obvious to more map makers that something is there. But take a look at what's wrong with the Americas here. That doesn't look right. They had no idea what it looked like, right? For all they knew, it was this skinny little strip of land that they could just sail around. And it takes almost 100 years for people to realize that actually there's a lot more to the Americas than we originally thought. And it was, in fact, a lot of these early explorers, if we go back to those earliest maps, really believed that they had reached India. Christopher Columbus died believing he had reached the Indies. Other explorers like John Cabot believed that they had reached China or India. And it is not until Amerigo Vespucci, who was an explorer from this period, starts to propose that maybe what we've discovered is a new territory, a new land, which is why we named it the Americas after Amerigo Vespucci, right? So the next question we have to go is, well, how were they able to do this? Because that's a long journey. And it is partly because of the technological advances that help facilitate sea travel. Advances in astronomy, helping chart locations at the ocean, instruments like the magnetic compass, which was invented around the 1300s. People had started to realize that the planet is magnetic. This points to magnetic north, which allows you to know what direction that you are going, make it easier to determine that. However, knowing what direction you're going is not helpful if you don't know how high or low you are, which is why we need to determine latitude. And there were multiple different instruments that came in order to help determine latitude. So the quadrant, the astrolabe, and the cross staff are all used to determine the latitude using celestial bodies. The quadrant came first, then the astrolabe, and then the cross staff. They all kind of build on each other. So they use the horizon, the stars, the location of the North Star, and all of these things in order to help people determine where they are. Because when you're out in the middle of the ocean and all you're surrounded by is sky and water, you could go in circles for weeks and not realize it if you don't have the proper instruments. So these are what made it possible. What also made it possible was a new kind of ship. So the Portuguese invented in 1450 a ship called the Caravel. It was a lighter, faster ship than the Spanish galleons and was much better suited to exploration, especially along the African coast, which is where they were going. It had new kinds of sails and rope riggings. The sails were could be used quickly and efficiently and maneuvered using taking advantage of wind power. They also had a rudder, a side rudder that allowed you to change directions. And of course, they also, for protection, included cannons had mostly been used in land-based armies up until this point, but now they're providing protection against hostile ships, and this really facilitated a lot of the dominance of the indigenous people that they are exploring. So, as we're looking at this age of exploration, we really start with Spain and Portugal. They are the ones who are kicking all of this off. And we have to kind of ask ourselves, why Spain and Portugal? We haven't talked a lot about them in this class yet. And so, what is it that they have that allows them to really begin this? So, one, they are two of the major powers in Europe at the time. They may not be the biggest European powers, but they are pretty important, Spain in particular. They're also incredibly wealthy. They have the cash, right? And that cash is going to allow them to fund these expeditions. In addition to the cash, they are the ones inventing that navigational technology. They are the ones who create the astrolabe and the quadrant, and they're funding all of this. And also, the fact of the matter is, everybody else is busy, right? So, if you think about the other countries in Europe at the time, they are going through the Renaissance and the Reformation. They've got a lot on their plates, whether it's cultural explosion or whether it is religious conflict with the Protestants and the Catholics. they've got other things that they're worrying about. Spain and Portugal, the Reformation doesn't touch them, right? They are very Catholic and not interested in changing that. And so, what we're going to really see with Spain and Portugal is that they have the time and the resources in order to start exploring. Now, once they start exploring, it's important to look at why they went where they went, right? So, Portugal is mostly going to be around the Horn of Africa, right? Spain is mostly going to be in the New World. So the Portuguese, they're not interested in making colonies in Africa. And I think that's important to note. They are more interested in making port cities around the coast, places where they can stop off while they are sailing across their trade route. Spain started this whole thing looking for a new route, didn't find it, but what they did find was new land. And so they are much more interested in these New World colonies. Now, Portugal also starts to get interested in these New World colonies, which leads to a battle over the New World, where they are ready to go to war for this territory. Enter the Pope. The Pope does have to step in. And because Spain and Portugal are so Catholic, they are willing to listen to the Pope. And so what the Pope does is establishes something known as the Treaty of Tordesillas. And in this treaty, he divides the world. So he draws what's called the line of demarcation, which basically is a line that splits the world in half. To the left is territory that gets to go to Spain. To the right is territory that gets to go to Portugal. Now, you do need to know Treaty of Tordesillas, so make sure you have the name of the treaty as well. And at first, it might look like that Portugal gets the better end of this deal, but I want to point out something important by showing you a different map. So when you look at this, you have to remember that most of that territory up there in Asia and Europe and the Middle East is already controlled by somebody else. It's not controlled by Spain or by Portugal. So they don't get any of that, right? But what this treaty is saying is that new territory gets to go to Portugal. So essentially what he's saying is if you discover any islands in the Indonesia and the East Indies, any territory you claim in Africa, in Australia, you get that. Otherwise, it goes to Spain. Now, you will notice that Portugal does get a little tiny bit of the Americas. That is modern day Brazil, which is why today Brazilians still speak Portuguese while the rest of South America speaks mostly Spanish, because the Portuguese did get a little tiny sliver of the New World with the Treaty of Tordesillas. So once the Treaty of Tordesillas is passed, you got to imagine that the other countries in Europe are feeling a little iffy about this, right? They're not happy. And so other explorers really start getting out there, and many of them don't listen to the Pope anyway, could care less about the Pope, right? But they're getting out there to really start laying their own claim. So ultimately, we end up with 5 types of explorers, and you should be able to sort any explorer that you learn about into one of these 5 categories. So the first are the ones looking for the route to the Indian Ocean. These are our earliest explorers. These are mostly Portuguese. They're the ones that are surrounding the Horn of Africa and really looking for those new trade routes for themselves. The second one are the conquistadors and Spanish explorers. These are the ones that are the earliest settlers to the New World, settling mostly in South and Central America and a little bit into the southwestern part of North America, like what is today like California, New Mexico. These are the ones conquering native nations, hence conquistador is Spanish for conqueror. And like I said, they are mostly Spanish. There are a few other nations that play a role in that as well. But these are the ones really beginning the first settlements in the New World. The next group are the circumnavigators. So these guys are, once they realize that the world can be sailed around, there are people who are like, hey, we should give this a shot. So they are sailing all the way or circumnavigating the globe. Now, a lot of this is just for like the bragging rights to say that I did it, but they're also obviously looking for new resources and new territory as well to see what else is out there. Next are people who are searching for what is called a Northwest Passage. So these are mostly going to be French and English. And basically what they want to do in order to compete with Spain and Portugal, they said, hey, they found their way through the south. Maybe we can find a northern route to sail through what is now Canada to get to India. Now, if you look at a map of Canada, there is no river that cuts half all the way through Canada. a Northwest Passage does not exist. But they didn't know that. They didn't have the hindsight that we have. So while they fail to find a northern route to India, they do settle Canada, which is why Canada today is mostly French and English. The last but not least are the people who are settling colonies in North America. So these are kind of what's left over after the Spanish kind of got their say in South America. The Spanish kind of came up to North America and were like, nah, we're good. Um, there are stories of like Spanish people making it to like what is now North Carolina and then turning around and heading back because it was all swamp. And they were like, we don't care about this. The English and the French were like, we okay, we'll take it then. So the English and the French and the Dutch are mostly going to be the people who colonize up in North America. These are your Puritans and your Pilgrims, all of those folks. So that's who we're kind of looking at here. So as I said, you should be able to sort any explorers that we talk about into one of these 5 categories. So we will pick up with later how and why settlements happen. But until then, I'll see you next time. Bye.